It would be easy to forget how momentously American politics changed 11 years ago when this happened.
We have breaking news, momentous news, really. CBS projects that Senator Barack Obama of Illinois will be the next president of the United States.
But to see him pull this off, not to be appointed president, but to win the presidency.
A seismic shift in American politics. You are looking at the 44th president of the United States.
Election night 2008, Barack Obama achieves this historic win many thought they'd never see in their lifetimes, and the 47-year-old announced the change was real.
It's been a long time coming, but tonight, because of what we did on this day, in this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
The change came quickly. Crowds all over the country celebrating, a barrier broken for civil rights, a political shift as Democrats stepped away from Bush and Clinton for a new coalition, and the president-elect vacated the Senate seat he'd won just 4 years earlier, a seat he won by largely avoiding the machine politics of Illinois, often transactional, sometimes corrupt. Obama's vacancy would leave the decision about his replacement to that local politicking.
President-elect Obama has formally resigned his Senate seat.
President-elect Obama resigned his Illinois Senate seats today, effective Sunday.
Now that President-elect Obama's Senate seat is going to be open in Illinois, there has been a lot of discussion about who's going to be appointed to that seat.
Who's going to be appointed? Well, it depends on who is doing the appointing. And that was the call of one of the scrappiest, most outlandish governors in the country, you might remember, Illinois Democrat Rod Blagojevich, a pugnacious former amateur boxer turned prosecutor turned politician. And he didn't follow the normal rules, deploying a brash and even comical style, even impersonating Elvis at a street party in Chicago.
Take my advice, treat me like this. If you really want to lose, treat me nice.
He also starred in a pistachio nut commercial and in a collision foreshadowing the future of both politics and impeachable conduct. You may recall Blagojevich tried to rebound from a corruption scandal by making a deal to be on one reality show, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and then appearing on Celebrity Apprentice with Donald Trump.
And what was Rod doing? Well, it couldn't be that bad. I mean, I'm just asking sort of an innocent question, I think.
Rod was napping.
Napping?
Yes.
All right. Maybe that's not so bad.
I did have my sunglasses on, so maybe my eyes were open.
Maybe. Look, the politician turned reality star was facing off with a reality star who would soon turn politician. And their thirst for manufactured attention wasn't their only mutual interest here. Both have faced bribery scandals for abusing their office. Now, these trends may be related. The governor who treated his job as a kind of an angle for ambition and branding, and the president treating your taxpayer military funds as an angle to extort re-election help. So go back to that big night of Obama's victory. As many people thought about what it meant for the nation, for the government, well, in Illinois, Governor Blagojevich was thinking about what it meant for him personally, and he began musing about how to use the power to fill that vacancy. And here's something you almost never hear in public. But there are tapes of him talking when he didn't know anyone was listening, musing how he could use the power to fill the seat to help himself or hey, maybe just give the Senate seat away as a birthday gift to family.
I told my nephew, Alex, he just turned 26 today. I said, Alex, you know, I called him for his birthday, and I said, it's too bad you're not 4 years older, because I could have given you a U.S. Senate seat for your birthday.
Now, that might sound like bravado, but then he began more serious discussions with staff about getting something for the seat. Use the power to get something in return, obviously called a bribe. Governor talked to his chief of staff about whether he could swap something with the Obama administration, like giving the seat to Obama confidant Valerie Jarrett to get a cabinet post in return. That was his idea. So this is what it sounds like when someone asks about setting up a quid pro quo bribe.
We should get something for that, couldn't I?
Yes, and I said, well, if that's the case, I'm sure there'll need to be more discussions. So,
how about Health and Human Services? Can I get that?
Can I get that? That's not legitimate negotiating. That's conspiring for a bribe. This obviously echoing today because governors do have absolute power to appoint the senator, just like presidents have absolute power on foreign policy. But that power doesn't mean you can sell the appointment off for a bribe or run foreign policy to extort bribes to help your reelection. These same incriminating tapes show Blagojevich declaring that if he doesn't get the right deal for the bribe he wants, if it's not good enough, he'll just appoint himself senator.
And if I can't get the right deal, John, then I'll take it myself. That's kind of where I'm at. What do you think of that?
Right, and I think just publicly we got to make sure we're always talking about best interest of the state, best interest of the state.
Right, best interest of the state and somebody who can do the most good for the state.
That's bad, and that's not even the smoking gun. If you're wondering how we are even hearing these secret tapes of a governor plotting a bribe, it's because, like many criminals before him, Blagojevich didn't think he was being taped. But as Lil Durk would say, it was the feds listening. They had him wiretapped in this bribery investigation, and they got a damning admission of his corrupt intent. Here you can listen to the smoking gun.
I've got this thing, and it's golden. And I'm just not giving it up for nothing.
I'm not giving it up for effing nothing. Rarely do you hear a defendant so bluntly state his criminal intent. He won't fill the seat unless he gets something of value in return. He's soliciting a bribe. This is textbook bribery, the governor corruptly seeking something of value in exchange for his act here appointing the senator. And that was enough for the feds to move in, indicting Blagojevich, setting off a trial that would rip him out of the mansion of the governor's office and land him ultimately in prison. Prosecutor Pat Fitzgerald laying out the charges and saying the blatant bribery that was exposed on the tapes you just heard, it would make Abraham Lincoln roll over in his grave.
Governor Blagojevich tried to sell the appointment to the Senate seat vacated by President-elect Obama. The conduct would make Lincoln roll over in his grave. We have a tremendous amount of information gained from the wiretap and the bugs that occurred over the last month and a half or so.
Those wiretaps sealed the toughest part of these kind of cases, the intent. And as a conspiracy, others went down with the governor as the FBI arrested his chief of staff in the raid. Rachel Maddow at the time reporting how it was all looking like a bribery machine.
Blagojevich was arrested along with his chief of staff by FBI agents on charges, in layman's terms, of being a one-man kickback and bribery machine who had put Barack Obama's recently vacated Senate seat up for the highest bidder.
Even by the historic standards of Illinois corruption, the case laid out today against Governor Blagojevich was stunning.
Stunning evidence of bribery, all on tape. And that's a matter of evidence, not partisanship. Blagojevich, though, he did happen to be a Democrat, and he was trying to cut deals with other Democrats. And he tried defending himself by appealing to party, going on TV, even making a celebrity Apprentice appearance and saying, oh, who's a Democrat?
Are you guys Democrats? How about taking a picture with me? Here, come on. How do you do, sir? Pleasure meeting you.
You're a disgrace.
No, none of that's true. It's all baloney.
You are a disgrace.
Well, no.
Enjoy prison.
Hi. Hello. How are you? Hey, nice to meet you. That guy's angry.
Didn't go that well. Meanwhile, within a week of Blagojevich's arrest, the House of Representatives in Illinois launched its impeachment. Democrats and Republicans hearing the evidence, hearings, and a procedure really similar to what we're seeing right now on a national level. Bribery hearings. And then as now, experts on law and corruption explaining trading government power for something of value is bribery. The quid pro quo deal to do it is the bribery, a huge crime. The law doesn't go easier on you if you were bad at it or didn't pull off the whole plot. That's a basic legal point we've reported on this show. Blagojevich obviously didn't succeed at selling the Senate seat. He got busted, but that doesn't help his defense. He was guilty of bribery regardless of whether someone took him up on his plot.
It's a crime in the state of Illinois to offer to do a public act for value. Whether somebody takes you up on that offer is irrelevant.
Irrelevant. Blagojevich did not beat impeachment or conviction in court by arguing that he only attempted to sell the seat because that attempt is obviously bribery, a lesson that echoes right now when you hear Trump allies offer defenses like this.
Attempted bribery isn't in the Constitution. Remember, Ukraine got its military aid. It was 14 days delayed. Big deal.
Wrong. And as for the debate that ensued then, Blagojevich's own defense attorney conceded in the impeachment probe soliciting a bribe is bribery.
The governor of the state of Illinois was engaged in behavior in an attempt, quid pro quo, to trade a U.S. Senate seat for something of value.
He didn't do anything.
So you disagree with Mr. Lang's contention that offering something of value.
Except there's no, I know, of course I don't disagree with Mr. Lang's contention. Offering is a crime. Where does it say he offered anything?
There was a pretty clear offer for a Senate seat, certain considerations.
Offering is the crime. Now, it's hard to defend bad evidence, so like Trump, Blagojevich's messaging turned to other conspiracies, talk of witch hunts and, quote, lynchings. There was a lot of effort to distract.
The case is a fairy tale. The process is a witch hunt.
You're talking about the witch hunt? Is that what you mean? Is that what you're talking about? I hear it's a joke.
I'm not going to quit a job the people hired me to do because of false accusations and a political lynch mob.
He said he was a victim of a, quote, lynching.
Well, it's a word that many Democrats have used. It's a word that many people have used over the years.
The fact that he might say, he being Rod Blagojevich, say things that offend people doesn't make them impeachable.
I believe it was inappropriate. I do not believe it was impeachable.
Well, the House of Representatives disagreed. Members from both parties impeaching and convicting Blagojevich in a Senate trial, so he was removed from office.
And Governor Blagojevich is hereby impeached.
I now pronounce the judgment of conviction against Rod R. Blagojevich, thereby removing him from the office of governor, effective immediately.
Losing the big job for bribery. Far worse for him, he was convicted in a criminal trial. 18 charges, including bribery, attempted extortion, fraud, conspiracy, and, noticeably, obstruction-related charges like lying to the FBI. He got hit with a 14-year prison sentence. Hard time because bribery is a serious felony. You can see him right here reporting to prison for the first time in Denver in 2012. He remains there to this day. Here's how he looked from a photograph in August. The governor, convicted of a bribery plot that he didn't fully execute, is still slated to serve 7 more years in prison because this is serious stuff, life-altering stuff, lose your freedom type stuff. That's something to keep in mind as witnesses now detail how the official policy of the Trump administration was, yes, there's that term, quid pro quo bribery to get Donald Trump something personally valuable to him. Some have testified about that gravely, some a little bit glibly, but no Trump official has come down to these impeachment hearings and ever denied under oath what the others admitted.
Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
You take it all together here, you got to wonder what President Trump thinks of his old apprentice colleague who's in so much trouble for bribery, right? Does he ever think back on him? Well, the president actually did speak to this, saying, yes, he thought the punishment was too harsh and he is considering a pardon.
I thought he was treated unbelievably unfairly. He's been in jail for 7 years over a phone call where nothing happened. So Rod Blagojevich, I am thinking very seriously about commuting his sentence.
Wow. And that was in August. The world didn't know yet, but Donald Trump knew that he'd been doing bribery solicitation on his own phone calls. And yet again, exposed in public, the question of what do we do as a nation with people in office soliciting bribes, abusing their power, and asking for help for themselves that undercuts the American public. Hey, I'm Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.